I'm Doug Kanter. I was a first lieutenant in the Army. I was a surgical ICU nurse. I was at Walter Reed Hospital, and then in Mosul, Iraq. I was from a military family, and I had served enlisted for about 9 years, and I was working as a civilian ICU nurse in California, and while I was enlisted, I had been an Arabic linguist with an MI unit, so I thought I had something to offer. I didn't believe in the war, the initial invasion, but I thought that with my medical training and language skills, I'd be able to help both American and Iraqi patients. So I headed up to Walter Reed, and as some of you know, there were problems there. It was pretty noticeable. I worked at a small hospital in California, and the facilities where I worked, this is supposed to be the flagship of military medicine in the US, and they were the worst conditions I'd seen in any of my clinicals as a nursing student or working as a nurse. We had a 13-bed surgical ICU. There was only one room that was really big enough to house all the equipment and have space for maybe a visitor, basically enough space to work. We had two 4-bedrooms that were separated only by curtain privacy barriers, which made infection a really big problem up there. Acinetobacter basically ravaged the whole unit. The kidney transplant team wouldn't recover their patients there because they had a patient contract this Iraqi strand of Acinetobacter and died. This was brought to the attention of everyone that was there. Nothing was done. We were lacking equipment to include just basic analgesia for patients who had lost their limbs and were in pain. There was a constant struggle with the administration to try and get more equipment, and they didn't. Some of the basic life-saving equipment, rapid infusing machines to put blood and fluids in someone who's been injured, were either non-existent or they only had one for the whole hospital. So my experience at Walter Reed was not very good, and it was clear to me that with all the "We support the troops" bumper stickers, that it really didn't mean anything, because let's face it, when someone gets blown up, it costs money to take care of them properly, and they're all used up at that point. As far as our administration is concerned. So I actually volunteered to go to Iraq, and I was with the 47th Combat Support Hospital out of Fort Lewis on FOB Diamondback. We took care of 90% of our patients were Iraqi, most of them civilian, and every sort of human injury you can think of we saw there. The way it worked with Iraqi civilians was we would take care of them if we caused the injury. It was supposed to be also life and limb, risk of life and limb if we didn't treat them, but that kind of went out the window because there were so many people that needed treatment when our soldiers would go on patrol that we couldn't take all of them. But on a very regular basis, we were co-located with a Stryker brigade from Fort Lewis. We were getting patients in that had been shot at checkpoints or right at our gates. And just before I left St. Louis, I was going through getting all the processing done, and there was a unit that was returning. And one of the soldiers, I had to go to the front of the line because I only had a day to finish up my stuff, and they said, "Oh, where are you going, sir?" And I said, "FOB Diamondback, that's Forward Operating Base Diamondback." And he said, "Oh, we just got back from there." And it was an NCO. He said, "Word of advice, sir, if it looks funny, kill it." And I remember in my mind, you know, I'd been in the infantry enlisted. Wow, this guy's really burnt out, you know, like, ooh, good time to get back from this deployment. Well, what I found out over there is basically everyone gets burnt out. The unit we replaced there was, you know, completely, they were toast. They were just, here are the keys. You know, they're supposed to have this 2-week transition where we learn our job. Basically, they just stayed in their little huts and waited to fly out. And we basically became the same as our deployment lengthened. Some of the grosser problems that we had while we were there was, as everyone else has mentioned, even in the medical community with doctors, nurses, psychologists, we fell into the racism as well, calling everyone Haji. It was always different when we triaged patients, whether they were American, Iraqi civilian, or Iraqi Army. And we had 3 OR tables. So say when a bombing happens and there are, you know, 45 plus surgical patients that come to the hospital, triage gets very tricky. And it was always Americans first, and we even started breaking it down by where we were. There were also Kurds, and they were pretty friendly to us, so they would get in before Arab Iraqis. It got to the point where, you know, we started calling the Iraqi patients, we'd call them range balls, because just like on a driving range, you don't care about losing them. So, when I went over there, my intentions were very good, and I myself fell into, you know, this depression and this racism as a coping mechanism. And I can only imagine, you know, I was in my 30s, and I'm a medical professional, that if this was affecting me this way, what would it do to the rest? Actually, walking in here today, I just saw one of my specialist, Ramsey, whose tombstone is right over here from the 47th Combat Support Hospital. He was a soldier in my unit, and he was evacuated because he was suicidal, which doesn't happen very often in Iraq. People tell people they're suicidal all the time, and that's usually not a ticket out, so he must have, I don't know the whole story, but he was evacuated back to Fort Lewis, Madigan. A week later, we found out he had shot himself in his parents' house. Now, we were all surprised. What was he doing in his parents' house? Well, they'd let him go back home. At Walter Reed, I guess what I'm trying to say is the healthcare system is not set up for people. It's not set up for soldiers. In fact, it seems to me there's almost a conspiracy to not treat soldiers, because it makes you think about going back into the Army if your healthcare is so dismal when you get out, and the VA that's supposed to take care of you is so dismal. I'm not talking about the individual workers in the VA system. I'm talking about the system as a whole. And I had so many patients that would tell me, you know, 6 months later, and these are amputees, or family members telling me about patients with traumatic brain injuries that hadn't received benefits yet. They were still deciding whether they would receive them. Now, this is clear cut. You know, triple amputee is triple amputee. There shouldn't even be a question. But that's what's going on right now. The military right now does not, if you're a whistleblower or you're trying to make things better, really doesn't help. I wrote letters all the way up to the now Surgeon General of the Army, emails, and their chain of emails asking for equipment, etc. And I was retaliated against, and none of the recommendations ever came through. It was, keep your mouth shut, Lieutenant, do your job, work with what you have. Guess, in closing, just we need a better VA system. Anybody that can, any of the candidates that are up there need to put that forward. There are people right now, we're killing, soldiers are committing suicide at an alarming rate, 18 a day, and there's a reason. This war is very, very stressful because there's no clear end in sight and there's no mission, no clear mission. Thank you.
Hello. All right. Welcome everybody to Northwest Winter Soldier. Before I begin my testimony, if you are a Vietnam veteran, a member of Veterans for Peace, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, can you please stand up? I want to thank you for you all to be here. You're the ones who have helped guided us, and this is where the original Winter Soldier in 1971 in Detroit was organized by Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and unfortunately we have to do a second Winter Soldier. Hopefully this time around we'll get it right, and we don't have to do this ever again. But basically, my name is Chanan Suarezdiaz, formerly HM3 Suarezdiaz. I was a Navy hospital corpsman stationed at Camp Pendleton, California. I have a Navy Commendation Medal with Valor and a Purple Heart. And, I was in Ramadi, Iraq, from September 04 to February 05, and I was stationed with Weapons Company, which is basically the company with Humvees with machine guns on top. And basically, flat out, before I went to the Iraq war that has turned into an occupation, I was against it. I viewed it as racist, and at that time I was a liberal. I didn't agree with Bush, and I didn't want anything to do with it, but I felt it was my duty as a corpsman to save lives, Iraqi or American, and whoever it may be, and I was able to do that in Iraq. And basically, it was very confusing times. Everything happened so quickly, I remember before we left to Ramadi, our commanding officer, he got the whole company around, it was like this baseball field, and we're just kind of there, and he kind of gives this whole patriotic, motto, talk like, look around you, look to your left and right, these are your brothers, and not everybody that you you see right now, they're not going to come back. And, it kind of, you're thinking about it, and I'm like, wow, we're getting into something serious, and, you don't know how war is until you've been in a combat zone. And we went to Ramadi. which is a part of the Al-Anbar province. And at that time, it was during the height of the Sunni insurgency. That was during the time when, you know, we completely leveled and destroyed Fallujah. And I remember getting into Ramadi, and the second day that we were in Ramadi, we got into a huge firefight in the downtown area of Ramadi. It's called the Souk. And I remember just, you know, we're in a Humvee driving down, and all of a sudden there's, you know, IEDs, explosions going off, there's rocket-propelled grenades, there's small fires, everyone it's kind of chaotic, people are dismounting out of their vehicles. You know, as a corpsman with Marine Corps, I had an M16A4 with my med bag right next to me. I dismounted outside of my Humvee and I took cover. I was right next to a wall, and I just remember you know, pointing my weapon in a direction where, you know, I didn't see anybody, but I'm like, well, this is the only direction I can point to. And, you know, I remember thinking to myself, like, what the hell am I doing here? Because it's so surreal. It's kind of, you know, everything seemed like it was going in slow motion, and it was crazy. Throughout my time in Ramadi, you know, I mean, I saw a lot of things. I mean, for one, you know, a recurring theme that's been going on in this panel is just the overt racism that's within the military, which is institutionalized, and it's a means to dehumanize the quote-unquote enemy. And when you know, call everybody that looks Middle Eastern Haji, then it just, you know, it's a form of dehumanization, and it just makes it that much easier to kill somebody. And you know, so that term was tossed around all the time, Haji this, Haji that. You know, there was no respect for Iraqi culture for the most part. I'm not speaking for everybody, you know, in my company or particularly my platoon, but overall, the officers in charge of you and just your instruction, there was no real respect for the culture. I would say the majority of the people that are in Iraq or Afghanistan right now that are occupying it don't speak the language and don't really understand the culture. And you know, fundamentally, this is an imperialist war. I mean, who is benefiting from it? It's not us that's in this room. It sure as hell wasn't the people that are speaking in this panel, you know. It's basically, it's an ongoing thing. It happened in Vietnam and it happened again. And they use, you know, they blind people with terms of, you know, patriotism and, you know, duty to your country. But in reality, you know, we shouldn't have been here in the first place. And there was my platoon. I was in Whiskey 5. My platoon was a very unique platoon. We were very political, which was great. I was kind of, you know, the lefty in the group, and then there was like the extreme, like right-wing, you know, semi-fascist kind of guy. And we would just go in and, like, you know, it was a unique experience. You know, I think my platoon in particular was very mature in a lot of ways, and you know, we would debate politics all the time. Whatever, you know, our commanders would tell us what was going on, we would debate that. The people that we would talk to when we went into their homes, you know, getting their side of the story, we would discuss that, what we read on the internet. We would, you know, basically we would discuss all these things. And, you know, for the most part, throughout the 6.5 months we were there, I mean, there wasn't a clear mission. And the Marines that I served with when I was in Ramadi, a lot of them were involved during the initial invasion. And when they went back, and this is OIF 2, and they saw, you know, how quickly that changed, because the people in Iraq are organized, you know, they've organized, and they're a resistance force, and they're gonna continue fighting and resisting us until the last day that we're there. And you know, just with you know, insane corporate pillaging that's going on. I mean, in Iraq, you can get Subway in Iraq. You can get Haagen-Dazs. You can, you know, there's like, and these huge firm bases, when they're saying that we're not occupying Iraq, they have like mini AMC theaters. They have swimming pools. We have the largest, you know, U.S. embassy in the green zone. How are they going to tell us that we're not occupying this country and that, you know, we're just there to liberate the Iraqi people and just leave? Obviously, there's bigger things that they want. And it's under the ground, and it's also just controlling that region. And particularly, you know, we're at a time where over 1 million Iraqi people have died due to our invasion and occupation, and over 4,000 U.S. dead. I've had a friend die in Iraq. I myself was wounded, and it's really, I was able to speak to the Iraqi people because when you know, we do house raise all the time during the day, during the night, depending on what rotation we were in. And I look Arabic, and a lot of the Iraqi people felt more comfortable speaking to me, and I knew some more Arabic at that time, than they would talk to, you know, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. And you know, I would ask them all the time, like, hey, what do you feel about us being here? And you know, they would say, you know what, Saddam Hussein was horrible, but at least under Saddam Hussein, we had running water, we had electricity. You can walk down the street and, you know, the kids can go to school and not worry about being blown up, you know, walking down the street, you know, or, you know, just regular things that we here in our society, in this country, take for granted, the Iraqi people do not have. You know, we have no, well, people that have not been to Iraq have no idea how it feels, what those people are going through. It's, I mean, you can sympathize, but fundamentally, they're the ones that are suffering the most. And there was a particular platoon in Iraq, in my company, that was notorious to killing innocent people. My company, we lost 10 people. One of those people was my friend's. His name was Clifton. He died from a mortar attack on our base that happened every day, but that day they were lucky and a mortar landed right behind him. He was only 19 years old, and he died. And this particular platoon, they lost 2 of their guys. And when you're in combat, obviously you're very tight. You're being shot at. You live with each other for like, you know, 24/7 for like 7 months, or now you have a year, over a year. And you know, there's one particular incident that I remember. We were doing house raids in the middle of the night. You know, a cordon search throughout the city of Ramadi. We came back and we're tired, exhausted. It was like 3, 4 in the morning. We went into the chow hall looking for some food, and I specifically remember 2 Marines bragging about, you know, telling each other like, "Hey, did you see me shoot that Haji in the stomach while he was running away?" And it was basically, you know, an older guy who was walking home and he was shot in the stomach. There was, I saw an incident to where we were on a convoy going to this army base. Well, it used to be an army base called, I think, COP. And basically, there was a firefight, and there was a family walking down that road, and the Marines opened up in the whole area and basically shot this 12-year-old, she was a 12-year-old Iraqi girl in the stomach. Her mother was shot in the leg, and her father and her brother, they weren't shot, but they were hysterical. And things like this happen every day. And you know, the longer we stay there, the more innocent people that are being killed, the more resistors that we're creating. You know, put themselves in your shoes. You know, well, put yourself in their shoes. Basically, if somebody in your family was shot trying, you know, going home, you know, or going to school, going about your business from an occupying force, you're not going to tell me you're going to pick up a weapon and you know, resist the people that are occupying your country, you know? And you know, just to wrap it up, basically is, you know, it's important for our movement to support GI resistance, because fundamentally as a strategy, GI resistance is fundamentally it's what's going to end these occupations. And it's a movement of people that will end these criminal occupations. And 2-4 did, and the whole, well, not platoon, a squad was completely wiped out and was ambushed. And the commanding officer wanted our platoon, a squad of our platoon, and it would have been me with them on the ground, to do the same route. And we're like, hell no. You know, I had a big ass mouth, and I was talking to my Marines, I was just like, I don't feel, this doesn't feel good, this is BS, you know, this is wrong, you know. And basically everybody just started, and nobody wanted to do it. And everyone's just walking, talking, and we were supposed to be all geared up and ready to go, and we didn't, it wasn't happening. And our platoon sergeant, who wasn't feeling it either, he went and talked to our platoon commander, who was a gunnery sergeant, and talked to the CO, and we were able to well, he canceled that mission, and we didn't go. So I don't think these are isolated incidences. I think this is happening every day in Iraq, and this is something that the military, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan, I think this is something that the military doesn't want to happen, because it's kind of like lighting a fire, you know, on a prairie. And I think, like I said, the longer that we're in these occupations, you know, the more people will resist, and we need to build this movement. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Manzel. I'm a high school English and history teacher. My husband Seth, down there, he joined the Army as an infantryman in May of 2002 after losing his job as a salesman at a gun store. He was deployed to Iraq between October 2004 and October 2005, and he spoke a little bit about it already. Before I begin to speak about military families and the toll the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have taken on us, I would like to thank Iraq Veterans Against the War for having Northwest Winter Soldier and for letting me have a chance to speak. I know that the soldiers that are deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan pay a price I couldn't even imagine, but I think it is important to recognize that families pay a huge price too. When a soldier goes on such long deployments, sometimes lasting 15 months or more, and then sometimes deploying again after only a couple of months, or when a soldier doesn't get the help they need when they come home with PTSD or some other physical or emotional problem, the burden is placed on families to fight to make things right. So thank you, IVAL, for recognizing military families. Excuse me. The Bush administration talks of family values and how we must keep these values intact. Really what the administration is doing is splitting families apart. Think of the over 4,000 mothers and fathers grieving, children without parents, wives and husbands lost searching for answers. And these are just the numbers of families that have lost loved ones due to death. What about the families who get their sons or daughters back physically, but they are not the same person who left? I know Seth is not the same man that left in October 2004. He witnessed and probably participated in activities unimaginable to you or I, but he has to live with this every day and find a way to cope and still be a father and husband. Sometime in the last 3 years, I've come to the realization that instead of trying to fight Seth to find the person he once was, to accept that he has changed and help him cope with the person he has become. I think we are very lucky that we have a great relationship and we've found a way to work things out after his redeployment from Iraq. Some couples are not so lucky. I'd like to tell you about my friend Teresa and her husband Jose. Jose was deployed with Seth in the same company. When the guys got back, we wanted to go out and celebrate. We were very excited. And after a few hours of celebrating, Teresa and Jose started arguing and disappeared. When we finally caught up with them, Teresa, she was shaking up, said that Jose tried to hold her down and choke her in their SUV. When confronting Jose about it, he had no idea what had happened or why Teresa was so upset. So we jump ahead to a couple months later on New Year's Eve, and this time it was a little more violent. This time Jose pushed Teresa downstairs, punched her, slapped her, choked her, pretty much beat the hell out of her. Jose was arrested and placed on barracks restriction. Teresa, trying to be a good military wife, blackened and blue, approached the chain of command and asked them to take it easy on him. After all, he did just return from a very stressful deployment. Skip ahead a little bit more, 8 months again. This time, however, there's another argument, some more physical violence. This time, though, their 8-year-old son tries to step in to protect his mother, and he's the one that gets the punch to the face. If you haven't figured it out already, Jose and Teresa are no longer together, and their 3 children are without a father now. And after about 12 years of being a good soldier, Jose was dishonorably discharged. And I have to say, their story is not an isolated incident. Many military families are torn apart because of the stress the war is taking on them. I would say that the divorce rate is probably higher amongst military families, but the Pentagon disagrees with me in a recently released report. Sometimes the stress on a soldier can make him go to the extreme. In July of 2005, only a few months before Seth's unit was due to return, an 18-year-old wife from the unit was brutally murdered by her 19-year-old husband. I'm not going to use their names because I didn't know them personally, but the incident had an effect on me and the rest of the wives in the unit. Of course, we were all very shocked and very worried. Were our husbands going to come home and stab us, kill us, beat us? You know, we didn't know what the guys had been going through over there. And after all, they are trained to kill. The commanders assured us, all of the wives and family members, that when our soldier came home, he would be completely fine, and if he wasn't, there would be help for him, as long as he asked. There's one last thing I want to mention before I end. With wars come baby booms. When the guys returned, many wives became pregnant, and in Seth's platoon alone, there were 6 wives who had miscarriages, one of which was me. Seth and I had been trying for a second child before he even deployed, and you can imagine our excitement when we found out we were pregnant, and then our devastating disappointment with our loss. Thankfully, though, we now have a healthy little Lily who is a year and a half. The question, though, that I've had since then has been why. First, my emotions got the best of me, and I asked, why did this happen to me? But after thinking it over and thinking more rationally, I started thinking, why so many? Why so many miscarriages in one platoon? Is it because of if more people are getting pregnant, there will naturally be more miscarriages, or is it another reason? It's my suspicion that our soldiers were probably exposed to depleted uranium, or maybe some other type of biological or chemical agent. Or maybe it could have been the many number of injections they get before they deploy and before they redeploy. As I mentioned before, we were lucky to conceive a beautiful, healthy little girl. But there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not worried about her. I'm always worried that there may be something hidden that we don't know about because of the Iraq deployment that might just one day take her away from us. Finally, I like to say that anyone who has been in the military or part of a military family knows that sacrifice is just another part of the job. You sacrifice your days, sometimes your nights, sometimes you sacrifice birthdays or anniversaries. And you do this without being asked and without complaint, maybe a little bit of complaint. But what happens when a family or soldier makes the ultimate sacrifice? Where's the help they need and that they deserved and sacrificed for? Maybe some of you heard, or maybe even experienced, the horror stories of the bureaucracy of the VA, being sent from one window to the next just trying to get some kind of help. Or what about the stories of commanders telling their soldiers it's better to stay in the barracks with their buddies instead of going into a treatment program because of the stigma of being on the 5th floor of Madigan, because a soldier who asks for help is not Army strong. Members of the military and their families are there when our country calls for them, but where's our government, the one that they have sacrificed so much for, when they need them the most, to help them return to a normal sense of being? Today, we've all come together to speak in solidarity to end this war. And I say that we mustn't speak on these issues just on special occasions or anniversaries or when the number keeps going up. We must talk about these issues every day. We must speak up in any way that we can, every day, until every service member comes home. And we must speak, excuse me, and we must speak until real family values are back in our country. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sara Rich, and in 2003, I was a single mother of 3 dynamic children, and I was the head of a Human Rights Commission in my city. No way in the world would I ever think that I'd be sitting here today, a mother of an Iraq veteran against the war, and a war resistor, and a military sexual assault survivor. My daughter joined the military, and people keep saying, how does this happen to you? I was raised on a commune with hippies. How did this happen that you had a daughter who went into the military and went to Iraq? And like Chanan says, it's a very surreal experience. The amazing feeling to watch your baby leave and be deployed to a combat zone is something I don't think I'll ever get over. Seeing her leave, telling her she was my hero, that she was so brave. It's really humbling to be sitting here with everybody today, because every time I meet another Iraq vet against the war, I just cannot get over the feeling of pride that I have for them as I have for my daughter Suzanne. And gosh, the things that Suzanne went through in Iraq I still don't know everything, and I don't think I ever will. You know, she'd call me from Iraq and tell me about, Mom, these people are so dirty. Why are they so dirty? They don't take care of their children. They don't take care of their environment. There's trash everywhere. There's dead people everywhere. And so I had to explain to her, well, Suzanne, it's a war zone. People can't focus on their, the environment if they can't figure out where they're going to sleep or where they're going to eat. What an amazing place for a 19-year-old to learn about hierarchy of needs and what people need to survive and to live. One of the things that, when the recruiter told Suzanne that she would not be deployed to Iraq, I was one of those people that believed them. I didn't know it was a joke that military recruiters don't tell the truth. I really didn't understand that. So she gets to Iraq, and the first day she's there, she reports back to me that her commanding officer is hitting on her. And when Suzanne got back from boot camp, she was all Army, be like, who the hell is this kid? And I suggested that maybe she'd want to take some things with her to Iraq, and she said, Mom, people don't have sex on deployments. And she was absolutely serious. So when she gets there, this 19-year-old girl in a combat zone, and her platoon sergeant, so that's 5 people above her, her platoon sergeant looks at her and says, hey, Swift, let's do this. And she said no. She told her equal opportunity officer, and he did nothing. So she goes about her business, and she's calling me, telling me about this, about all the guys and what they're saying to her. And she said, Mom, in the Army, women are seen as either bitches, dykes, or whores. She goes, I don't want to be any of those things. I just want to be a soldier and do my job and just be somebody's friend. But you can't do that, is what she would explain to me. One of the things about being a military mom is you can't focus on worrying, because if you worry, then she's going to worry. And my daughter and I are pretty tight, and so I had to be really calm. I never told her I missed her. I never told her I was worried about her. I always said, you be smart. You be smart. You watch out for yourself. You know, you're going to be great. You're doing awesome. I'm so proud of you. Because I knew that if she was if she thought I was worried about her, oh my God, would she be so worried about me. So you just have to hunker down and just kind of put your head down. You live with your cell phone and your computer because that's one of your lifelines to your kid. And you cancel your newspapers because you don't want to see how many dead people and how many dead soldiers were killed in Iraq today. You cancel your cable service because you don't want the war invading your life anymore that it already has on such a, you know, primal level. So Suzanne starts telling me about this, okay, not platoon, but her squad leader, and how he is starting to hit on her. And they enter into a sexual relationship that she doesn't want, and she doesn't know how to get out of it, and she's scared. And so finally I start calling my congressman, and yeah, you're right, if their lips move, they're lying. They're lying, they're liars. She tells me about what he's doing to her, and I start asking for help, but she's too scared for me to ask for help for her because she doesn't know what this man will do. It's very interesting that this man's name, his initials are M. Lester. So I always said, how's the molester doing? You know, and I always called him the molester. Back then, I didn't understand what military sexual trauma was. I didn't know there was a term for it. I didn't know what command rape meant. I'm still really just shocked about what happened to Suzanne. And like I said, I don't even know half the things that she really witnessed or went through. You know, things I heard about the combat she saw, because she was a Humvee driver. Oh, should I say what she was? Okay, she was a specialist in the Army with the 66 MP Company from Fort Lewis, stationed in Karbala from February 2004 to February 2005. She drove a Humvee during combat patrol. She was a military police officer. And then she was arrested and they court-martialed her and took away all of her rank, and now she's a specialist still back again because she's earned her rank back, and she's still in the military. What was I saying? Let's see, notes. I was really shocked by the amount of sexism and racism that was happening in the US Army, and the things that Suzanne would report to me about calling people Hajis, and the way that they had to tear people down so they could not see them as humans. But she was very upset when she befriended the interpreters, and the interpreters would go home to their children and she'd tell me about their families and about the interpreters. And one of the interpreters was beheaded when he went home, and they put his head on his car and said, this is what you get for helping the US military. This really choked Suzanne up. Another thing that happened when Suzanne was there is kind of a Pat Tillman death. Her friend Jessie Berger was killed. The US military told the mother that it was a car accident, whereas he was really shot. Then they told her that it was a Turkish army where the bullets came from, and the Turkish army had no record of that. So to this day, Peggy Berger is still waiting to find out how her son Jesse, who died on May 5th, 2005, died. So Suzanne gets out of the military, and I say, now can we say something about the sexual abuse and harassment that she went through? And she says, no, we can't do anything about that. They start her process to redeploy her 11 months after her initial deployment. And I always have told her, you know, we can get you out of here. Well, get you out of here. You do not have to go back. And she said, no, I'm going to go back. I'm fine. It wasn't that bad, Mom. You know, and we all know that a lot of the times our vets have to just block everything off, because if you don't block everything off, then you can't be human when you're in the US military, or you break down. So she gets ready to go back to Iraq. She's packed and she's ready to go. And a lot of you know this story already, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much. And she turns to me and she goes, I can't do it. I can't go back. And I said, good, let's get you the hell out of there. So my daughter, who went AWOL, she didn't really do it because she was against the war. She did it because she was scared to death for her life. It wasn't until after she was arrested for going AWOL that she watched the movie Sir, No Sir, and realized, GI resistance, we got to stop this. This was a war, this is wrong, this is illegal, and this is immoral. And that's when Suzanne stood up for herself and has been standing up for herself ever since, saying no more war. And when Suzanne, when Suzanne was arrested, we kind of went national with her story and what happened. And I started hearing all these stories about military sexual assault, about women who have been murdered in Iraq after being raped, and the military is saying it's murder, like the Lavina Johnson. I have to talk about Lavina and the murders that are happening. I think the Johnson family know of 9 families so far that have young daughters who they were told committed suicide in Iraq. And then they get the pictures, and these women were actually murdered in Iraq. And I always think, God, that could have been Suzanne if she had told about being raped in Iraq. I want to thank everybody for having me here. I'm a member of Military Families Speak Out, Courage to Resist. A proud mother of an Iraq vet against the war who's active duty and starting her own chapter on base. Code Pink, thank you so much for having me.
Kanter. I'm a psychiatrist who specializes in treating veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm very honored to be invited to be on a panel with these veterans. I'll start by offering a heard. And a couple of panelists have mentioned that many of the most severely affected of our veterans are unable to participate in an event like this. And so I feel like one reason that I'm up here is to speak for many of the veterans that I treat who can't do this. And not only are they not able to come up and speak publicly, many of them would be unable to tolerate being in a room with a crowd of this size. I must say that I am not speaking in an official VA capacity. I want to be clear on that. I'm speaking as the president-elect of Physicians for Social Responsibility, PSR. PSR is an organization that's vigorously opposed this war from before it started and works with IVAW and Veterans for Peace and VVAW and similar organizations in coalition. So again, thank you for IVAW for having me, and thank all of you for being here today. What I want to discuss are the true costs of this war. And it turns out that one very large part of the costs of war come in the area of healthcare. And so as a doctor, I want to talk about the hidden wounds and the hidden costs. And many of them are intentionally hidden, because if people knew more about what the extent of the costs are, maybe they'd be less prepared to go to war. So we know about the deaths. We know of the tally of more than 4,000 that are represented by the headstones that we see around the room. Many of the deaths, including suicides, including wounds that are lethal but that people die of after they're evacuated, including the deaths of over 1,000 private contractors. They are not counted. Then there are the wounded, the injured, and the medically ill, totaling over 70,000. And intentionally, those numbers are kept in 3 different categories. And they are hard to find. The ratio of wounded to killed in the current conflicts is much higher than has ever been known before. In Iraq, it is 8-to-1, compared to Vietnam, where it was 3-to-1, or World War II, where it was 2-to-1. And the reason, there are two reasons. One are the advances in the body armor, and second are the advances in battlefield medicine. We can stabilize and airlift people to Landstuhl Air Force Base in Germany within 24 hours, where to compare that in Vietnam, people were treated in the field. It might have been weeks before they get out. So this is a real incredible development. However, we are left with service members who have grievous injuries, people who would never have survived with these injuries before. And we as a society will be paying the costs to care for these grievously injured for the rest of their lives. We have a new word in the clinical lexicon. It is a terrible, sanitized word. The word is polytrauma. We have polytrauma clinics here in Seattle and around the country now in VA and military healthcare facilities. Polytrauma means people who've been terribly blown up and have multiple severe injuries, missing arms, missing legs, missing hearing, missing vision, burns, fractures, head injuries. Many, or the majority of these injuries are blast injuries. So we keep putting more and more armor on our personnel and our vehicles, and the insurgents keep increasing the magnitude of the explosive forces. And we are getting a tremendous number of people to care for who are just blown up and have polytrauma from blast injuries. One new phenomenon that we're seeing in large numbers that we don't really yet know how to deal with is the traumatic brain injuries. And these are injuries from a blast wave. They're atmospheric pressure injuries from the great blasts. And we don't yet know much about the real pathology or what's going to happen. It's a new kind of hidden wound that takes its place alongside post-traumatic stress disorder as one of the hidden wounds of war. Recently, the RAND Corporation issued a report looking at, they surveyed returning veterans, and what they found were 14% were returning with PTSD, 14% with major depression, and 19% with a probable traumatic brain injury. 1/3 of all returning veterans had one of these conditions, and 5% of all returning veterans had all three conditions. Now, if you think about the fact that we've deployed over 1,600,000 personnel so far, that tells you that just looking at the PTSD and major depression, we're going to have 300,000 to 400,000 psychiatric casualties. Many of you in this audience are familiar with the symptoms of PTSD, which there are a bewildering array of symptoms. And PTSD is a war wound no less than is a shrapnel wound. It can be tremendously debilitating. I won't go into detail, but the symptoms include nightmares and flashbacks, triggered physiological and psychological distress, social withdrawal, isolation, avoidance of any kind of reminders of the trauma, emotional numbing, uncontrolled outbursts of anger or rage, difficulty concentrating and focusing, what's called hypervigilance, which the military calls battle mind, which is being extremely watchful and on guard all the time. What would make it impossible for a vet with severe PTSD to just even be in the room with us today. So one of the things that I see that's been mentioned are the struggles at the level of family, community, and society that these veterans face. They struggle to maintain marriages, they struggle to maintain jobs. And for me personally, listening to stories of trauma day in and day out, it's my family that helps me cope. So it's ironic and painful for me when I have to listen to stories of disintegrating marriages and families that are torn apart. There was a study that was done prior to the current conflicts that showed that 9% of all unemployment in the country, this is not just veterans, this is everybody, 9% of all unemployment is attributed to combat exposure. 8% of all divorce or separation of everyone is attributable to combat exposure. 21% of all spousal or partner abuse in the country is attributable to combat exposure. War and exposure to combat have devastating effects on our society. Much of this is hidden, and it's up to veterans more than anyone to speak out. And these are the voices we must promulgate and we must hear. In addition to divorce, unemployment, family violence, you see behavioral problems in children, child abuse, drug and alcohol addiction, incarceration, homelessness. These are terrible problems. So they go beyond the individual and they reverberate across generations. I want to mention briefly what we know about suicide. We know that combat veterans, and this is, studies look at all veterans going back to World War I. Combat veterans are twice as likely to commit suicide as people in the general population. And we know that the active duty suicide rate is higher now than it has ever been since it's been measured in the last 30 years. So these costs are staggering. And in the long term, the health care costs of this war, the costs to pay for medical care, for disability benefits, for all of these problems that we will face, are greater than the military operational costs of the war. Every day that this war goes on, we accrue more of these costs, and these are costs that not only are we paying now, but we will pass them on to our children and our grandchildren. So again, I thank IVAW for having me. I thank everyone for being here today, and I hope that this event will serve to renew everyone's determination to end this war. Thank you.